The British Empire just got smaller. Now, if we look at the height of the British Empire in the 1920s, it was huge and it covered about a quarter of the globe. Now, today the British Empire is much smaller, but technically still exists, even though the vast majority of it is now independent, some having some bonds with the British left and others being completely independent, absolutely. Now, for a long time, India was known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. But it's not just in the Indian subcontinent that the British had colonial holdings, but throughout the Indian Ocean, and indeed also in the South Indian Ocean over the islands of Mauritius, which are found for some way to the east of the island of Madagascar. Now, the name Mauritius actually comes from the Dutch name Maurits, after Maurits of Orange. A squadron of the VOC discovered the Mauritian archipelago in 1598 and claimed it for the Dutch Republic. Some limited settlement would occur with basically just VOC traders derping around. They managed to hunt the dodo to extinction, so great job guys, Wilhelmus moments all round. But in turn, they would be chased from the island by an unlikely foe. Now, it wouldn't actually be the British, although it is a British article which tells us that the island of Mauritius, which is also named the Island of Monkeys on account of the multitude of those animals which destroyed everything in it, was discovered in 1698 by the Dutch. That should be 1598. Who named it Mauritius of Maurice of Orange and quitted it by reason of the great number of monkeys on it. So these long-tailed macaques ended up chasing the Dutch from the island of Mauritius. They had actually been brought there earlier by the Portuguese, who had discovered it somewhat earlier than the Dutch had. And it seems that Arab traders had also visited it in the 10th century already, although there was no population there. The first permanent population to arrive then would be in 1715 with the French. The French would populate it both with entrepreneurial Frenchmen and with many tens of thousands of enslaved Africans, mainly taken by slavers from Madagascar as well as from East Africa. These would have a real range of backgrounds, and this would lead to a very diverse culture emerging on Mauritius. About 80% of the population in the 18th century would be made up of enslaved people from Africa, and unlike other island nations that were ruled over by the French, such as Haiti, where they would eventually become self-ruling with the help of some Polish people, as I talked about in this video, the French managed to remain in control of the island, but for a brief spell during the French Revolution, though the French would regain control very quickly afterwards. However, in 1810, it would be the time of another colonial power to take over.
We'll have a fantastic holiday.
Even though the French managed to defeat them at sea, the British were still able to land troops and to occupy Mauritius in 1810. However, in doing so, they did agree to keep the main language as French, and they would also change the island in numerous ways, bringing over new people from around the empire, particularly from the Indian subcontinent, although a unique blend of cultures would continue to make Mauritius quite unique. Some 92% of Mauritians to this day speak Mauritian Creole, which is a French-based Creole largely based on French, but with influences from several other languages as well. The British ruled Mauritius with several other territories together. Some of these islands in the neighbourhood to the north were called the Chagos Archipelago. Now, in 1965, when the British were preparing to grant Mauritius independence, the British separated the Chagos Archipelago from the rest of Mauritius, so that when Mauritius were to become independent, then Chagos would not become independent alongside it, instead being ruled by the British Indian Ocean Territory. In 1967, they agreed a deal with the American, a deal that had been in talks for several years, that the atoll of Diego Garcia would become an Anglo-American airbase used for testing, and the larger Chagos Archipelago would be depopulated. Chagos, it's important to note, was also ruled over by the French, and the French were the first to bring enslaved people from Africa to this archipelago. Their descendants would become known as Chagosians and were the native inhabitants of this island at this point. Did the British take them into consideration at all? Not exactly. In fact, in a letter they were referred to as, unfortunately, along with the birds go some few Tarzans or men Fridays. and over 1,000 of the islanders were forcibly removed from the island and repopulated in the Seychelles and Mauritius. Not only was this deeply immoral, it was also illegal as of the 1960 United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1514, subsection 6, which stated, "Any attempt aimed at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and the territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations." By separating the Chagos Archipelago and removing its native population by force, the British had thus broken international law. In 2012, supported by the African Union, Mauritius presented the case for the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which several years later ruled in favour of Mauritius that this had indeed been a legal manoeuvre by the British, and that the British should return the archipelago to Mauritius. In 2017, the United Nations General Assembly also ruled that an investigation should be made into the conduct of both involved, and supporting Mauritius, they presented the case to the International Court of Justice, which also ruled in favour of Mauritius. However, the British replied that this was a non-binding agreement, and that because an independent Mauritius had never ruled over the Chagos Archipelago, they had no reason to return it to them.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
But in 2022, the British agreed that it would enter into negotiations with Mauritius about the British Indian Ocean territory. However, in 2023, these talks broke down. Then it's slightly surprising that now in October of 2024, the British, seemingly out of nowhere, announced that they would in fact be giving the Chagos Archipelago to Mauritius. The Anglo-American base on Diego Garcia, however, would remain in Anglo-American hands, although they did say that the Chagos Archipelago would, as part of Mauritius, be open to repopulation by its initial population of the Chagosians after such a long time. It's somewhat surprising that this has occurred seemingly out of nothing, and a few guesses have been given as to why the British position has changed on the Chagos Archipelago. Part of this may have to do with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where Britain, as a strong supporter of Ukraine, may be trying to woo over various other African nations, many of which are either neutral to or in support of Russian actions in Europe. It's possible that by giving the Chagos Archipelago to Mauritius, Britain is trying to show a new face, and one that is willing to work with African countries if they are willing to work together with the British and others in order to defeat the Russians. Some in the UK fear that this may be the start to several other overseas territories being given to various powers, in particular the Falkland Islands, where in the 1980s a war was fought with Argentina, who attempted to wrest them unsuccessfully from British control. However, the British government of the Falkland Islands has said that its commitment to those islands is unwavering. So that was the reason why the British Empire has technically got a little bit smaller this October. Let me know in the comments below, had you ever heard of the Chagos Archipelago? For me, this is entirely the first time. I wasn't entirely sure where to find Mauritius on a map, so it's good to learn something new about a bit of geography and history, and I hope that I've shared some of that with you here today. Let me know in the comments below, did you enjoy this video about the Chagos Archipelago and Mauritius and this long-standing dispute between Britain and Mauritius? Do you think that the right choice has been made here? Perhaps that it should have been made a long time ago? And I hope that the descendants and people who were forcibly removed from their homes are now able to go back. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I have been Hilbert, and this has been The History.